This video includes numerous terrain elements provided by Archon Studio, who are currently running a crowdfunding campaign on Gamefound for another range of terrain called Dungeons and Lasers Encounters. There is a link in the video description below so you can check that out, and there is more about this campaign at the end of the video. After the encounter at the bridge, you and your companions were able to slip past a couple of orc patrols and reach Tor Varden. There were no guards posted outside, and very little indication of anyone inside. Then, a muffled scream came from somewhere in the tower. It was a sign both good and ill. There is at least one man alive in Tor Varden, but you might already be too late to save him. You will need to move fast. Hey everybody, welcome to Always Bored and Never Boring. You never thought it was going to happen. I was starting to think it was never going to happen, but we are back playing Rangers of Shadowdeep after an immensely long wait. If you will recall, we have our ranger Tsubasa with his panther Guinevere, and he is accompanied on his adventures by the magical siblings Hansel and Gretel with their bodyguard Johann. In our last adventure, we snuck across a bridge to get to the Tower of Tor Varden. Along the way, we picked up a man-at-arms who has now joined us for the rest of our adventure. And now we need to get inside Tor Varden and find out exactly what is going on. For this adventure, you're supposed to have 3 tower rooms to explore. I have decided to create 2 tower rooms and 1 courtyard. And the way this adventure works is each time you move into a new area, you draw a card and the card will tell you what kind of room you have discovered. I have already done that for the courtyard, and we got the storage room, which seems quite fitting. I've just chucked a load of barrels and crates around in the courtyard to make it look like the villains are taking things inside the building. If this is the first of my Rangers of Shadowdeep videos that you have seen, you might want to go back and watch the rest of the series. If not, I will explain rules and things as we go, but I'm not front loading the video with rules at this time. Furthermore, it has been a little while since I've played Rangers of Shadowdeep, so be forewarned, there will probably be a few rules errors in here. There's always a chance of that anyway when I'm making a video because I have to think about camera work and narrating what I'm doing, so sometimes mistakes will slip through, but being a little bit rusty on the rules as well, there is an increased risk of that, so do be aware of that. But we are just going to jump right in. I've already set up the first room apart from putting the enemies in. There are a few tests we need to make. We have to make both a stealth roll and a pick lock roll to see if we can sneak into the forecourt without raising the alarms. There were items we could have found in the previous mission which would have helped with that. We did find a scroll which would have helped us to avoid having to make the stealth check roll, but unfortunately we were unable to decipher what the scroll meant, so we're still going to have to roll. There was also a risk that we might have auto-failed these tests, because in the previous mission there was a bird, a little spy that was flying across the board. If that had got across the board before we finished the mission, it would have got to Tor Varden and warned of our approach, but we beat the bird here. So first we are rolling for stealth. We're going to use Tsubasa to make this roll because Tsubasa gets +2 to his stealth checks. We need to roll a 10 or more on a d20. We have rolled a 16. With our +2 modifier, we have easily passed the stealth check. The problem is we also have to pass a pick lock check, and I do not have anybody with the pick lock skill, so I am rolling a d20 and I need a 10 or more. And we roll a 9, even just a +1 somewhere along the line would have made all the difference there, but we have failed the pick lock test, which means we are going to suffer a penalty as we enter the forecourt. They have heard us jangling the keys, they know we are coming. For the first turn, we are only allowed to place 4 of our heroes. They have to be placed within 1 inch of the entrance. I have selected Tsubasa, Guinevere, the man-at-arms who is joining us on our adventure, and Johann. Next turn, at the start of turn 2, Hansel and Gretel can enter the fray as well. Next we have to place 2 treasure tokens. We have to place them in the corners of the room opposite the wall where we entered, like so. And we can just remove this card from the board now. This was the card that randomly decided what kind of room we were going to explore. The description of this room says that it contains 4 Gnoll fighters. I don't have any Gnoll miniatures, or at least none that are painted up, so I'm using orcs instead, but we're using the stats for Gnolls. Furthermore, because we failed the test to pick the lock, 2 of these orc fighters are replaced with orc archers. So we have 2 archers guarding the treasure, standing behind cover, and we have 2 fighters in the centre of the room. With that done, we can begin turn 1. We have until turn 4 to get out of the courtyard and into the first room of the tower, or we will face another penalty. We are ready to begin turn 1. We start with the ranger phase where I can activate the ranger, Tsubasa, and 2 of his companions. And we're going to start by doing something called a group activation. Normally you would activate your characters one at a time, but with a group activation, you can activate your ranger and 2 other companions who are within 3 inches. They will each take a move action, and then they will each take a second action. And this is a way of orchestrating an attack so you can position as many characters as possible to get involved in the action. The first character we're going to move is Guinevere the panther, who has a movement of 8. And we are going to charge towards one of these orcs, and what we're going to do is we're going to pull one of those orcs closer to us. As soon as you move within 1 inch of an enemy that is not engaged in combat, it will move that 1 inch closer to get to you. Guinevere moves to there, and she is facing backwards because she's a slightly annoying miniature and she's going to get in the way if she faces forwards. But now, having moved there, she is within 1 inch of one of those orcs, and that orc will advance to get into combat with her. We can now move a second character. We're going to move the man-at-arms, and he only has a movement of 6, but because that orc has moved, he is now in range, so we can get the man-at-arms into combat too. So he's going to scooch in there. Finally, we're going to move Tsubasa. He is going to try and engage the second orc separately. So Tsubasa will move to there, and the second orc will engage him. Tsubasa is now going to fight this orc. He rolls a d20, he gets to add 3 for his fight roll. The orc fighter rolls a d20 and gets to add 2. For this dice roll, the blue dice will be Tsubasa, the orange dice will be the orc. And it's a really bad start. The orc rolled a 3, which was a good opportunity for Tsubasa to pull out a big hit, but instead Tsubasa rolled a 4. We add our fight of 3, giving us a total of 7. We have won the fight. Unfortunately, when we convert this into damage, we're not going to hurt the gnoll at all, because when you convert things into damage, you take your total combat roll, which in this case is 7. You add any modifiers. In our case, we are adding 2 because we are using a 2-handed katana, so that takes it to 9. But the orc has an armor class of 11, so once you take those 11 armor points off the 9 total we rolled, we have inflicted no damage at all. That's a fluff. Next up, we're going to attack with our man-at-arms. The man-at-arms is also adding +3 to his dice roll, but he gets an additional +2 because Guinevere is assisting, so he gets +5 to the orc's +2. And we have rolled an 8. It's another bad roll, although the orc only rolled a 3. So to that 8, we add our fight bonus of 5, giving us a total of 13. We then deduct the orc's armor class of 11, which means we have inflicted 2 wounds. That is not nearly good enough. Orcs have a health of 10, so that orc still has 8 wounds remaining. But we did win the fight, and that means we now have a choice. We can either stay engaged in combat with that orc, or we can push it 1 inch away from us, or we can move 1 inch away from it. I'm going to stay engaged in the combat, the reason being, the 2 archers on the board can only target enemies that are not engaged in close combat, so at the moment, Tsubasa, Guinevere and the man-at-arms are not valid targets. If I push the orc away from me, those archers are free to start shooting. Now we have Guinevere's second action. Guinevere could attack the orc, but her fight value is +0, so even with the +2 from having a man-at-arms to help her, she is only level pegging in terms of combat prowess with the orc, and she doesn't have a lot of wounds. I'm really just using her as a bonus generator to give +2 bonus to anybody else in a combat situation, so she's not going to do anything else for now, she's just going to growl a bit. It is now time for the creatures to activate. Creatures activate in health order. We have 3 enemies on the board that have a health of 10 and 1 with a health of 8, so we have to determine randomly the order of the 3 that have equal health. We're just going to roll some d8s. First we will roll for the orc engaged with Tsubasa. He rolled an 8, orc in the top right. He rolled a 7, orc in the bottom right. He rolled a 4, so bottom right orc goes first, then top right orc, then the orc engaged with Tsubasa, finally the one engaged with the man-at-arms. Our orc has a bow with a range of 24 inches, which means Johan over by the entrance is in range. Furthermore, the orc does have line of sight to Johan. It may not look like it from your angle, but he can just about see Johan. However, in order to shoot at Johan, he will have to shoot across some barrels and across a well. When the orc shoots, it will add its shoot modifier of +2 to a dice roll of a d20. Johan, when defending, will get to add his fight value of 4. Furthermore, because there are 2 intervening pieces of terrain, he gets an additional +2 to the modifier. So Johan gets +6, the orc gets +2. And Johan has rolled a 19 to the orc's 8, so that is easily blocked. He has easily deflected that attack. The orc will do nothing else this turn. For our second orc, things are a bit more complicated. The orc has line of sight to characters, but is not in a position to shoot at any of them. He cannot see Johan because of the scuffle going on in front of him. However, he is not allowed to shoot into combat either. The AI for creatures in ranges of Shadow Deep is pretty basic. If they can see something, they will shoot at it. If they can't see something, they move around a bit randomly. In the case of an archer who has line of sight to someone but cannot shoot because they are in combat, I treat it as if they do not have a hero in line of sight, so our orc will move in a random direction. To determine a random direction, I'm going to roll a d4, and we will move in the direction of the highest number on the base of the d4. So there we go, we can see the highest number on the base of the dice is a 4, and it is pointing down and to the right, so we will move in that direction. Orcs have a move of 6, so that gets him right up to the wall there. Next we activate the orc that is fighting Tsubasa. We have another combat situation. Tsubasa gets +3, the orc gets +2. And Tsubasa rolls a 19 to the orc's 11, so Tsubasa wins the fight and will actually inflict damage on the orc. How much damage will he inflict? Well, he has rolled a 19. He adds his fight of +3, giving us a 22. Furthermore, he inflicts an additional 2 points of damage from his katana, taking it to 24. When you take off the orc's armor of 11, that's 13 damage, and the orc has fallen on his own sword there. In his desperate lunge to attack Tsubasa, he has opened himself up for a counterattack, and he has been defeated. That orc will be worth experience points at the end of the game. Finally, we have the orc in combat with Guinevere and the man-at-arms. In a situation like this, the enemy will always attack the target with the lowest health. That is, in this case, Guinevere, so Guinevere has to face an attack against this orc. They both add +2 to their dice rolls. And Guinevere rolls a 16 to the orc's 11. We add our +2 from being assisted by the man-at-arms, giving us a total of 18. We take off the orc's armor class of 11. That gives us a total damage of 7. Added to the 2 wounds the orc has already received, that's 9, but orcs have 10 wounds, so this orc is just about holding on. We will mark that damage with dice, and because Guinevere won that combat, we can choose, if we wish to push the orc 1 inch away, and we're going to do that because the archers have already activated now, so they're not going to get an opportunity to shoot at us. With that done, enemy activations are complete, and we continue into the companion phase where any companions who haven't activated will get a chance to do so. That only leaves Johan. Johan is going to do a double move. Because he's very slow, he only moves 5. When you do a double move, you move your maximum distance for the first move, in this case 5, and then for your second move you will move up to half your distance again. That gives him a total of 7.5 inches. Which is just enough to get into base contact with this orc. Unfortunately, he won't be able to instigate a combat because he will have used 2 actions to get there, and you only get 2 actions each per turn, unless of course there's a special rule that says otherwise. But we will have positioned him successfully for next turn when we can really get stuck in and finish off this orc. We move to there, that's 6 inches. At that point we stop because the orc will engage with us. He will move 1 inch towards us. This orc is obviously a glutton for punishment. Next would be the event phase, but there are no events in this particular scenario, so we begin turn 2. The first thing we have to do before starting our ranger activation is introduce Hansel and Gretel to the board. They turn up at the entrance. We now go into the ranger phase. We get to activate our ranger and 2 companions. And in this case, I am not going to do a group activation because I think Johan, with the assistance of Guinevere, is going to be able to kill this orc by himself. And I would like to start advancing across the board to deal with these archers afterwards. So first we're going to activate Johan, and for his first action he is going to attack the orc. He is getting a +4 from his fight value here, and he is getting an additional +2 from the assistance of Guinevere. So that's +6 to +2. We have rolled a 9, which is less than the 10 that the orc rolled. However, the orc is only adding +2 for a total of 12. We are adding +6 for a total of 15. That means we have won the combat. Furthermore, once we deduct the armor class of 11 from our total of 15, we have inflicted 4 wounds, more than enough to finally kill the orc and score some more experience points. Johan is mopping up there, and he still has a second action, which he is of course going to use to move. He's going to advance across the table. He is not concerned about arrows. Gotta say, if I was an archer and I saw that thing lumbering across the battlefield towards me, I might reconsider my life choices. Next up, we're going to activate Tsubasa, and Tsubasa is a nimble chap. He has a movement of 7. Unfortunately, that's still not enough to get into base contact with that archer. So we're just going to do a double move to get into base contact with him to shut him down before he starts shooting at people again. As before, the orc archer will advance to close the gap. With our third activation, we are going to activate Gretel. She's going to do a double move, making sure she stays in cover so no archers can shoot at her. It's now creature activation. They both have the same number of hit points, so we have to roll for random initiative. Remember, the lowest number will go first. So this is for the top orc. He gets an 8. And the orc in the bottom right gets a 7. So our archer in the bottom right does have line of sight to Tsubasa but cannot shoot at him because he is in combat. He also has a clear line of sight to Johan, so he is going to shoot at him. It's a clear shot, so there are no modifiers for any line of sight obstructions. So it's +2 on this dice roll, while Johan gets +4. And Johan has completely fluffed his roll. He rolled a 2, the archer rolled a 13. The archer is adding +2 for a total of 15. We then have to deduct Johann's armor class, which is 12, which means Johan actually takes 3 wounds, and that's not great. That puts him down to 9 wounds. I guess he shouldn't have strode across the battlefield so confidently after all. But anyway, that completes that orc's activation. It has fired a shot, so it's going to stay exactly where it is. The second orc is in a combat situation, so we'll have to fight Tsubasa. And unfortunately, orc archers aren't as good as orc fighters in a scuffle, so that orc only gets +1 to its dice roll. Tsubasa, of course, gets +3. And Tsubasa rolls an 18 to the orc's 9. To that 18, Tsubasa adds his fight value of 3 for a total of 21. Additionally, he is using his two-handed katana, so he gets an additional +2 damage, taking that up to 23. Once we have taken off the orc's armor class, which is 11, we have inflicted 12 wounds, which instantly kills that orc. Archers, know your place. That was pretty brutal, but we now get to activate the rest of our companions. Our man-at-arms will do a double move, a total of 9 inches towards the orc in the bottom right corner. Guinevere is also going to do a double move, giving her a total of 12 inches. That's going to position her in such a way that she can drag the orc archer out from behind those barrels and open him up to some attacks next turn. The movement puts Guinevere there, and the orc charges in. Finally, Hansel needs to catch up. He's also going to do a double move, a total of 9 inches, placing him there. That finishes all of our activations. There is no event phase. Turn 3, we need to get this door open. As a reminder, we have until the end of the 4th turn. Fortunately, it looks like we're going to be okay with that. We now have to start our ranger phase. Unfortunately, Tsubasa is too far away from anybody to do any kind of group activations, but we still get to do an activation with Tsubasa and 2 of our other companions. And we are going to start by activating our man-at-arms, who is going to scooch around behind the barrels and attack this archer. The man-at-arms is +3 with an additional +2 because of Guinevere against the archer, who is fight +1. And he has rolled a 16, the orc has rolled a 10. Obviously the 16 wins. To that we add our +5 modifier, giving us a total of 21. When we take off 11 for the armor class of the orc, that leaves us with exactly 10, which is just enough to kill the orc with a single hit. Apparently, being distracted by a panther means you are not aware of someone sneaking up behind you to stab you in the back. With our second activation, we will activate Gretel. She's going to do a double move to get to the treasure token in the top corner of the board. Next turn, she can spend one of her actions picking that up. And for our final activation, Tsubasa is going to move to stand in front of the door, ready to open it. Next up would be the creature phase. There are no creatures to activate, so we go straight to our companion phase. We are going to do a double move with Hansel, a double move with Johan, and a move with Guinevere. That finishes the turn. We go into turn 4 and we have to open that door. So very briefly, in turn 4, Tsubasa isn't going to do anything, he's just waiting by the door. Gretel is going to use one action to pick up the treasure token and her second action to do a regular move. Gretel is now carrying that treasure token, she cannot pick up any more treasure in this game. Hansel is going to move adjacent to the second treasure token and use his second action to pick it up. We skip the creature phase, our man-at-arms catches up with the rest of the team, and finally, Johan kicks open the tower door. We draw a room card and we have found red 2. It is the torture room. In the torture chamber, we find several survivors from Tor Varden being tormented by orcs. In the centre of the room, a huge orc sergeant is engaged in hand-to-hand combat with a wounded soldier, while 2 orc fighters stand by jeering. In the corner of the room, there are 2 more badly wounded soldiers chained to the wall. As we opened the door in the companion phase, we go straight to the event phase. There are no events, so we start a fresh turn with our timer reset to 1. And we are going to start with a group activation. We are going to activate Tsubasa, Guinevere, and Johan. First, Tsubasa is going to charge into the room. We want to engage that orc that is closest to the door and remove him this turn if possible. Once we get to that position, the orc will activate and move to engage us. Next, Guinevere will activate and she will make a move action to also get into base contact with that orc. And finally, Johan lumbers into the room. Unfortunately, his slow movement of 5 only gets him to there. But remember, this is a group activation, so having made all of these move actions, we can now take a second action with each of these 3 characters. And we are first going to move Johan again. He will have just enough movement to get into base contact with that orc, so he can lend his modifier to any subsequent combats. Next, we will attack with Tsubasa. Tsubasa gets a +3 fight value as standard. He will get an additional +4 from having 2 allies with him as well. So he gets +7, the orc gets +2. And Tsubasa only rolls a 5 to the orc's 18. That's really bad, but fortunately we do have an ability called Hand of Fate, which allows us to re-roll 1 dice. We are going to use Hand of Fate to re-roll our 5. And this time, we get a natty 20. That is massive because it means regardless of what the orc has rolled, we will win this fight automatically. Furthermore, we get an additional +5 modifier to our dice roll. That was a really good use of Hand of Fate, which is just as well because you only get to use that once per game. To that 20, we add our fight modifier of 7, we then add +2 because we're using a katana, we then add +5 because it was a critical hit, and we absolutely pulverise that orc with 1 hit, which is exactly what we wanted to do. Guinevere has a second action. She could use it to move again to charge into combat with the orc sergeant and assist the wounded soldier, but I don't think that's a good idea. Instead, she is going to slink among the tables and crates, positioning herself to charge out into action again next turn. It's now time for the creatures to activate. We start with the creature with the highest health value, that is our orc sergeant. The sergeant is in contact with this wounded soldier, so will attack this wounded soldier, and unfortunately, that means there may be a death on the cards. This wounded soldier is unarmed, that means he is at -2 fight. The orc is at +3 fight and is also using a 2-handed weapon, which means he's going to do +2 damage as well. Let's see what happens. Well, the orc has rolled a 20 and the wounded soldier rolled a 5. Enemies cannot roll critical hits, a 20 is just a 20. However, in this particular case, 20 is pretty bad anyway, because obviously he has successfully struck the soldier. He inflicts 20 damage plus his combat bonus of 3 plus an additional 2 because he is using a 2-handed weapon. That's a total of 25. The wounded soldier has his armor, but he does not have a shield, so his armor class is only 11, and he only has 7 wounds. So unfortunately, as we charge into the room, we slay the orc, we turn to assist this wounded soldier, and we are just in time to see him get his head caved in. There's some trauma for my heroes to deal with later. Goodbye, wounded soldier, we hardly knew you. Next up, we have an orc. He has to target something that is in line of sight, that is Johan. He is going to move towards Johan and attempt to hit him. He's going to have to do a double move to get there, and Johan will move to intercept him as well. So orc goes there, Johan goes there, and now it is time for the companion phase. Unfortunately, Johan has already activated this turn, otherwise he would take a swing at this orc. As it is, we just need to get our fellow companions into the room to help us out. Our man-at-arms companion has just enough movement to go and join Johan in the fight. Gretel is going to use 1 action to move into the room, and she will use her second action to cast Weakness on the Orc Sergeant. Weakness is a spell that forces the target to make a will roll with a target value of 18. If they fail the roll, they will be at -1 fight, -1 shoot, and -1 armor for the rest of this scenario. Orc Sergeants have +0 on will checks, so as long as we don't roll an 18, 19 or 20, the spell will trigger. And we roll a 1, that's good for us. That means the Orc Sergeant is weakened. I'm going to use this cute little book token to indicate he is under the effect of the weakness spell. Finally, Hansel will do a double move to get into the room as well. We're all in, all of our actions are complete, there is no event phase, so we go straight to the second turn. It's time for our Ranger phase, and we are not going to do a group activation. We are first going to move Guinevere, so she is in base contact with the Orc Sergeant. For our second activation, we're going to move Tsubasa. Tsubasa is also going to enter combat with the Orc Sergeant. His movement of 7 is enough to get in there using a single action, so we can use our second action to attack, which of course we will do. We are rolling +5 in this fight because it's +3 from our fight, with +2 for the presence of Guinevere. The Orc is only at +2 because he has the weakness spell on him. And we have both rolled 18. So of course that means that Tsubasa has won this fight. To that 18 we add our +5, giving us a total of 23. We then add +2 because we are using our two-handed katana. That takes it to 25. From that 25 we deduct the Orc Sergeant's armour of 11. That gives us a total of 13, and the Orc Sergeant only has 12 wounds. So we have immediately got retribution for the death of that wounded soldier. Tsubasa is clearly very upset, and he insta-kills the sergeant. And in fact, he insta-killed the sergeant without taking into account that the Orc Sergeant was also at -1 armor because of the weakness spell. This guy is very, very much dead. Tsubasa, codename Swift Justice. And we have one activation left. We are going to activate Johann, because Johann is in base contact with this orc. Johann gets +4 fighters standard. He will get an additional +2 from the presence of the man-at-arms. That is a total of +6 to the orc fighters +2. And we rolled another 18 to that orc's 5. And I'm not even going to run through the calculations here. Once we have added the +2 damage from Johann's two-handed sword, we have definitely killed this orc. And that was an exceptionally good turn. Johann does get a second action. He's just going to use it to move towards the door in the north. And I almost forgot, when we killed the Orc Sergeant, he dropped a clue token. Again, I'm going to use that little book token. I'm going to place it where the Orc Sergeant was standing. At this point, we've wiped out all the enemies in the room. There won't be any events to cause us any problems, and we still have 2 turns before we have to open the next door. That means I don't think there's any point in playing through the turns step by step. I think we can fast forward a little bit. We will just talk about the things that can happen in this room before we move on. First of all, we have a clue token we need to explore. I would get Hansel to explore that token. And that involves rolling a d20 and consulting a clue marker table. We have rolled a 4. We have found some Fury Leaves. This is a single dose item. When you use it, it costs you an action to use it, but you will gain +1 damage for the rest of the scenario, but you will also be at -2 will. I don't think that's something I would want to give to Hansel, but he's going to carry it for now. Later on, we will distribute it to another character. The only other thing of note in this room is we have 2 prisoners chained to the walls. They are too badly wounded to help us, but they could be worth some experience points for us at the end of the scenario. For now, we can regroup and we can open the last door and find what the final room in the tower has to offer. And our final room is the armoury. You will have to imagine loads of weapons and weapon racks along the walls here. I just have a couple of bookcases and a small weapon rack by the door. But we also have lots of crates and barrels, probably full of more weapons. We have 2 clue tokens right at the bottom of the board, one on the left, one on the right. We have 2 orc fighters in the middle of the room. We have an orc archer at the back hiding behind some barrels. Because we seem to be having quite an easy time of it, I have escalated the danger in this room by introducing an orc sergeant as well. He has been placed next to the archer, just so we have a bit of a final boss to fight, because our aim here is to clear the room of enemies. If we clear the room of enemies, we have won the scenario. However, these scenarios end immediately as soon as the win conditions are met. So those 2 clue tokens at the bottom of the board, if we want to explore those, we have to do it before we kill the last enemy. We need to move some characters into the room. Unfortunately, none of my characters have enough movement to be able to make it into base contact with an enemy with a single action. So we're going to be a little bit more cautious this time out rather than charging straight in. And we're going to start by activating Tsubasa. He's going to move into the room, and then he is going to throw a kunai at one of these orcs. So we're going to move into there, and then we are going to throw a kunai. We only have 2 kunai, they are single-use items. And unfortunately, because I have moved, there will be a penalty to my shoot. Tsubasa normally has a shoot of +1, and the orc fighter normally has a fight value of +2. Because Tsubasa moved, he gains a +1 to the roll, so it's +1 for Tsubasa, +3 for the orc. And Tsubasa has managed to roll a 14. We convert that into damage, and unfortunately kunais are at -1 damage, so our total damage score is 13. We take off the orc's armor class of 11, we have inflicted 2 wounds. At least that's something. And I will place a dice there to remind me. Next up, we will move our man-at-arms. We're going to do a double move and place him there. He is going to protect Tsubasa. And then finally, we're going to move Guinevere. And we will put Guinevere like that, ready to pounce next turn. Having moved 3 of our heroes, we move on to the creature phase. The creature with the highest health is the sergeant, so the sergeant will move. And as he has line of sight to the man-at-arms, he will make a double move towards that character. That's a total of 9 inches. Next up, we have to determine whether the healthy fighter will move or the orc archer. So first we will roll a d8 for the fighter. He's rolled a 2, and the orc archer has rolled a 6. As before, we will work in numerical order, so the orc that rolled a 2 will activate first. And he is going to attack the man-at-arms. The man-at-arms could move 1 inch closer to the orc as the orc advances to try and close him down, but we don't want to do that. We want the orc to have to move the full distance to get into base contact with our man-at-arms. By doing that, the other orc will have to move around him and will end up in combat with Tsubasa. The orc fighter is +2, the man-at-arms is +3. And the man-at-arms rolls a 19 and the orc rolls a 20. So the orc has scored 22, the man-at-arms has also scored 22. It's a tie. Now this is pretty brutal because in a tie situation, both combatants take damage. The orc has dealt 22 damage. Our man-at-arms has an armor class of 12, which means 10 points of damage get through, and that man-at-arms has 12 total, so he is reduced to just 2 hit points. A strong breeze at this point will take him out of action. However, the orc will also take damage in this encounter, so we have inflicted 22 points of damage. The orc has an armor class of 11, which means 11 points of damage get through, and that orc only has 10 wounds, so despite a crippling blow, the man-at-arms still slays his foe. And that was pretty darn badass. Next up, our archer will activate. He has line of sight to the man-at-arms, so he will shoot. He gets +2 to the roll, the man-at-arms gets +3, however the man-at-arms is also behind a load of crates, so gets an additional +1 defense. And the man-at-arms only rolled a 3, but luckily the archer only rolled a 4, so the archer's total score was 6, the man-at-arms total score was 7. Luckily, our badly wounded man-at-arms dodges the arrow. Unfortunately, his luck will have to hold just a little bit longer because there is one more orc that is coming to fight him. That orc moves into combat. There is nothing Tsubasa can do except stand and watch and hope. The orc is +2, the man-at-arms is +3. And, unbelievably, both combatants roll a 10. That means the man-at-arms wins with a score of 13. Once we take off the armor class of 11 from our orc, we have inflicted a further 2 wounds. The orc is still alive, but so is our man-at-arms. That is the end of the creature phase, so we move on to our companion phase. Next up to move will be Johan. This will be a double move, a total distance of 7.5 inches. Next up to move is Gretel. She is going to move 6 inches to there, and then for her second action she will cast Bird of Light. This will summon a bird of pure magical energy, and that will appear in base contact with her at the end of the round. Finally, Hansel will move 6 inches into the room, and for his second action he is going to cast Transpose. This allows him to swap the position of 2 characters on the board, and he is actually going to cast it on himself and Guinevere. That completes our activations. There is no event phase. We can go straight on to our new ranger phase. And this time we are going to do a group activation. We are going to activate Tsubasa, Guinevere, and Johan. First we're going to move Guinevere to draw out the Orc Sergeant. Guinevere moves to there. As soon as she does, the Orc Sergeant moves into base contact. And then we will move Tsubasa into contact with the Orc Sergeant. And then we will move Johann into base contact with the orc fighter. And now we're going to do some combat. First we will attack with Johann. Johann has a fight value of +4, and he gets an additional +2 from the presence of the man-at-arms, while the orc fighter is just +2. And Johann rolls a 17 to the orc's 14. Once we add in our fight bonus of +6, that takes us up to 23. We then get an additional +2 damage from using a double-handed weapon. We have easily inflicted enough damage to finish off this orc. And now Tsubasa has to fight the sergeant, and this is a big tense moment because Tsubasa is fight +3, the orc sergeant is also fight +3. However, Tsubasa has the advantage of fighting with Guinevere for an additional +2 bonus. That's +5 to +3, not the best odds. However, it has really worked out in our favour because Tsubasa rolls a massive 19 to the sergeant's 1. When Tsubasa adds his fight bonus, that comes out at a score of 24. He used his double-handed katana, which means our damage total is 26. Orc sergeants only have an armor class of 11, which means 15 points of damage get through, and the orc sergeant only has 12 wounds, so that is, again, a single hit kill for Tsubasa. We're going to have to start calling him Orc Slayer. Finally, Guinevere has a second action. She may as well use it to do a second move. She can move at half speed, so that's another 4 inches. She is in cover now, so the archer is going to have a harder time hitting her. Speaking of the archer, it is the archer's turn to activate. They just have to shoot at whatever they can shoot at. They have line of sight to everything except for Gretel at the back of the board, who is hiding behind Hansel. And that means our archer will target the character with the lowest health. That is our man-at-arms. The archer shoots with +2, the man-at-arms defends with +3. And the man-at-arms rolls a 15, the archer rolls a 13, so the man-at-arms defends again. The man-at-arms manages to duck a second arrow. That is splendid. Hansel, Gretel and the man-at-arms still need to activate, so I'm going to activate Gretel first. She's going to move 6 inches. And I just realised I never summoned her bird at the end of the turn. I better do that now. There he is. But now Gretel has a second action. She is going to cast her final spell. She is going to cast Heal on the man-at-arms to restore 5 hit points. That puts our man-at-arms back at 7 wounds, and not quite so close to death's door. Next we will activate our Bird of Light, which has a movement of 9. We will do a double move to get to there. After activating, you have to roll a d20 for the Bird of Light, and on a 16 plus it vanishes. Hopefully it'll stick around next turn and help us fight this last archer. And indeed it will. Next we're going to activate Hansel. Hansel is going to move 6 inches, and for his second action he is going to cast the spell Teleport, which allows him to move 9 inches across the board. He is going to teleport adjacent to the clue token in the bottom left next to the stairs. As soon as you move into base contact with the clue token, your activation ends, you remove the token from the board and you roll on the clue marker table. And we have rolled a 17. We have found a book of astronomy. You find a book of star charts. Any figure carrying this book receives +1 to navigation rolls. Unfortunately, Hansel is at his maximum carry capacity, so if I want to take this book, he has to drop something else. And because we have a magic sword as well as our hand weapon, we're going to drop our hand weapon, and we will take the Book of Navigation instead. Finally, we need to activate our man-at-arms. It's just going to be a double move for him. With that done, our companions have finished activating. There is no event phase, so we move on to the next turn. We are going to start by activating Guinevere. Guinevere is going to scramble over these barrels to lure out this final orc archer. She will get to there, and the orc will come out of hiding to engage her. Guinevere does have a second action, she's not going to take it. For our second activation, we are going to activate the man-at-arms. With his movement of 6 inches, he can get into base contact with the second clue token. As before, we remove the marker from play and we roll on the clue token chart. And we have rolled a 13. Ooh, exciting, we have found a hidden note. Make a perception roll with a target value of 5. If successful, you find a note scrawled by the captain of the tower before he was killed. So let's roll on that. Our man-at-arms gets no bonus for perception, so we need a 5 or more on this roll. And we get a big fat 1, so we will never know what that note said. I have one activation left. It's going to be Tsubasa. Tsubasa does not have enough movement normally to get into base contact with this archer, but Tsubasa does have a special ability called Dash. Once per scenario, I can add +2 to my movement. That gives me a movement of 9 inches, which is enough to engage the archer, and hopefully we can kill him. Tsubasa is fight +3 with an additional +2 from Guinevere for a total of 5. The archer is just +1. And that is a 12 to the orcs 15. So the orcs total is 16. Fortunately, because of that +5, because we had Guinevere to support us, we do win anyway, because our total is 17. When we convert that into damage, we add +2 for our katana. That takes it up to 19. If we were to take off the orc's armor class of 11, we have only inflicted 8 wounds. Not enough to kill it, but Tsubasa also has a special ability called Powerful Blow. Once per scenario, if we inflict at least 1 damage when we attack, we can add +3 damage. And with that, we have inflicted the 10 wounds necessary to kill this final archer. And that is the end of the scenario. We have cleared the lower levels of Tor Varden. I would say, apart from that moment where it was a little bit touch and go with the man-at-arms, and apart from the untimely demise of the wounded soldier at the hands of the orc sergeant, that went really, really well. But of course, this is not the end of the story. We are now going to ascend the tower. We will find out what dangers lurk at the very top. Before we do that, it's time to update our campaign progress and see how much experience we earned here. First of all, as we leave the lower levels of Tor Varden, all of the injured heroes can recover up to 8 hit points each. That means both Johan and our man-at-arms who took injuries during this mission are fully healed. Next, it's time to add up some experience points for Tsubasa. Tsubasa will gain 3 experience points for each orc fighter, archer or sergeant that was killed during the mission. We killed a total of 6 fighters, 3 archers and 2 sergeants. That is a total of 33 experience points. We also get 10 experience points because we found those 2 injured prisoners and they survived to the end of the encounter. We can double that to 20 experience points if we choose one of our team to stay with them to keep them safe. The additional 10 experience points is quite tempting, but I think for the sake of losing one of my team, it's not worth it. Everybody on my team is quite important. They all have a role to play. I don't want to leave any of them behind. So we will just take 10 experience points for rescuing the prisoners. That gives us a total of 43 experience points. At the start of this mission, we had 191 experience points. Once we add the 43 experience points we have earned here, that takes us up to 234 experience points, which means we have leveled up. We have reached level 2, which means we can increase one of our stats by 1 point. We have a choice of move, fight, shoot, will, or health, and I think I'm going to increase Tsubasa's fight value by 1 to +4. That's because it's going to make it more likely that I win the fights, but also it's going to make it more likely that I do massive damage to the enemy. So Tsubasa's fight is now +4. I should also point out as well that all of our one-use heroic abilities and spells that we used during this campaign are also recovered, so Tsubasa will get back his Hand of Fate, his Dash and his Powerful Blow, and my spellcasters will recover all of their spells. Next we have to look at progression points, which is how our companions level up. Rather than gaining experience points, they will gain 2 progression points if they make it to the end of the scenario without being reduced to 0 hit points. That means all of our companions will gain 2 progression points. And that puts them all at 8. Once they get to 10, they will level up. And next we have to deal with the treasure tokens that Hansel and Gretel found. We have to roll on a treasure table for each of them. Let's see what we get. That's a 3. We have found gold and jewels. Our ranger has no use for these, but can return them to the king in exchange for either 10 experience points or 1 progression point for one of our companions. I'm going to go with the experience points, so that's +10 experience points for Tsubasa. And now for our second treasure token. That's another 2, that means more gold and jewels. If I had chosen one of my characters to gain a progression point, they could have gained a second progression point and they actually would have leveled up. As it is, I'm just going to give Tsubasa another 10 experience points. That takes him up to 254 experience points total. Well, that wasn't the best haul. I was kind of hoping for some items or something useful, but there we go, experience points. I gained 20 experience points that way. Also, of course, we have a few items in our possession. Namely, we have some Fireheart greens that Tsubasa is carrying, and then Hansel has a book of navigation, a magic sword, and the Fury leaves. He is very interested in that book of navigation. It's right up his alley as he is the walker in shadows, so he is going to keep the book of navigation, giving him +1 navigation. He will also keep his magic sword because he earned that and he really doesn't want to give it up. He's going to pass on the Fury leaves to someone else though. And of course, he's going to give them to Johan. And that is that. Overall, we gained a decent amount of experience points. 63 in total from killing orcs, finding jewels and rescuing prisoners. All of my companions gained 2 progression points, and we picked up some Fury leaves and a book of navigation. We did almost find an important note hidden in the last room, but unfortunately we didn't find it. I hope that doesn't come back to cause problems later on. But that brings this session of Rangers of Shadowdeep to an end. Next time we will explore the top levels of Tor Varden, and we will finally confront the big bad guy. But just before I go, I want to give a shout out to today's sponsor, Archon Studio. You will have seen numerous pieces of Archon Studio's terrain in today's video. I used their Abomination Vaults terrain to mark out walls for the Tower of Tor Varden, I used plastic columns and stairways inside the tower, and I also used some of the brand new Dungeons and Lasers Encounters terrain in the tower forecourt, namely the 2 hills flanking the entrance. I now have a huge collection of this terrain, and it's so useful, not just for role-playing games like Dungeons and Dragons, but also for many other tabletop games like Rangers of Shadowdeep. Currently, Archon Studio are running a crowdfunding campaign on Gamefound for a new range of terrain, including woods, swamps, ruins, and even some new monstrous miniatures. Each terrain pack is intended to make it quick and easy to set up a variety of encounters with a mix of terrain elements, all produced in hard plastic. And while you can use them as is, it's possible to make them look even better with a little paint. Pledges range from €99 through to €399, although there are optional add-ons as well, with an estimated shipping date of June 2023. And at the time of posting this video, the campaign has 7 days left. It's already raised over €440,000, unlocking a boatload of stretch goals, including a boat, and everybody who pledges at the €99 or above level also gets a huge Tarrasque miniature. So if you're interested in expanding your collection of terrain and miniatures for any tabletop game, you might want to check it out. If you would like to know more, there is a link in the video description below. So that's it from me for now. Thank you so much for watching. If you've enjoyed this video, please consider pressing the like button. If you really enjoyed this video, please consider subscribing if you don't already do so, and hopefully I will see you all again very soon. Bye bye everyone. Bye bye.